In the town of Karsfeld, the dead were buried close to the living. The ground beyond the southern wall was low and wet, and the graves there sank slowly, year by year, as if the earth were learning how to swallow them better. It was there, among leaning crosses and stones worn smooth by rain, that the blind musician played each evening. His name had once been Elias, though few remembered it now. Names, like faces, required sight to endure. To the townsfolk, he was simply the one who played for the dead. He arrived before dusk, tapping the path with a polished ash staff, counting steps by memory and sound. The air always smelled of moss, cold soil, and old iron from the fence that no longer held anything in. Ravens watched him without fear. They recognized ritual when they saw it. Elias sat on the same fallen marker each night. Its inscription had long since been erased by wind and grief. He placed his vial upon his knee, resting his chin where sighted men might have rested their gaze, and drew the bow slowly, as if waking something unwilling. The first note was always low and thin. It trembled. Not from weakness, but from restraint. He did not play hymns. He did not play dances. What he played had no clear beginning or end. It moved like breath through reeds, like water beneath ice. Those who passed nearby said the sound felt older than melody, more like remembrance itself. Why he played for the dead, no one asked anymore. Years ago, when the plague thinned Karsfeld to echoes, Elias had been paid to stand at gravesides and offer music where words failed. When the coins stopped coming, he continued. When the graves multiplied, he did not alter his pace. And when the living no longer wished to remember, the dead remained. He believed, quietly, without doctrine, that the dead still listened. Blindness had taught him that the world did not end where perception failed. Time, he felt, moved differently without light. It thickened. Sounds lingered. Silence gained weight. As the bow moved, Elias smelled damp wool from his own cloak, resin on the strings, the faint sweetness of decay. Somewhere beneath his feet, bones rested like unanswered questions. Death, he thought, was not absence. It was withdrawal. A step taken back so far it looked like disappearance. When the light finally drained from the sky, Elias played on. The town bells rang above him, counting hours for the living. Below them, the dead kept no time at all. Elias knew the graveyard better than any map could have taught him. Each hollow in the ground had a voice. Some swallowed sound quickly, others returned it, softened, like a hand placed over a mouth. He learned these differences the way other men learned faces. The dead, he believed, did not need to see him. When darkness settled fully, the air cooled and tightened. Moisture gathered on stone and cloth. Elias felt it on his knuckles, on the varnish of the vial. His fingers ached faintly, a pain that came not from age but from repetition, the slow erosion of flesh by duty. He played because stopping felt like betrayal. Once, long ago, a priest had asked him why he did not seek shelter at night, why he chose damp ground and company that could not answer. Elias had smiled then, a small and private curve of the mouth. "The living interrupt," he had said. It was true. The living demanded direction, purpose, improvement. The dead required only presence. They did not ask him to be better than he was. As the bow traveled the strings, Elias listened not only to the music, but to what surrounded it, the scrape of insects beneath leaves, the soft collapse of soil settling deeper into itself, the distant murmur of the river carrying time away without effort. Even the silence had texture, thick-furred, attentive. He remembered losing his sight not as a moment, but as a season. Light had thinned gradually, like a faith eroded by unanswered prayer. When it was gone, nothing replaced it. The world simply closed its eyes before he did. Freedom, he learned, was not clarity. It was adaptation. The graves were older than the town, some older than the church. Elias imagined them as listeners arranged patiently beneath him, skulls tilted, ribs open like broken instruments. He did not fear them. Fear required imagination, and imagination belonged to sight. Instead, he felt responsibility. If the dead were forgotten, he would remember for them. If time erased their names, sound would give them shape again, if only briefly. Music, he believed, was the only language that decay could not fully claim. Tonight, as he played, something shifted. Not in the air, but within the rhythm itself. The notes lingered too long. The echo returned altered, as if another hand had guided it back. Elias slowed, adjusting pressure, listening more carefully. The ground seemed closer. For the first time, he wondered whether the dead were not merely listening, but learning, and whether one evening they might answer. Elias did not stop playing. If the dead had learned to listen more closely, then he would learn to endure it. He steadied his breath and let the bow travel slower, drawing the sound thin as thread. The viol responded with a voice that seemed reluctant to leave the wood, as if it, too, sensed the closeness of what lay beneath. The change did not announce itself. There was no movement of soil, no cracking of stone. Instead, the night grew dense. Sound failed to wander as it once had. Each note fell almost straight down, absorbed immediately, like rain into open mouths. Elias felt watched, not with eyes, but with patience. He remembered his wife then. Not her face, which had blurred long before the darkness took his sight, but her breathing at night, the way it slowed when she believed herself safe. She had died in the second winter after his blindness, buried not far from where he now sat. He had played for her once, privately, long after the mourners had gone. He wondered if she listened still, or if listening was a task reserved for the living. Time, he reflected, was cruel not because it passed, but because it demanded participation. The dead were free of that demand. The living were not. Music, perhaps, stood briefly between, neither advancing nor retreating, only existing. A sound rose beneath his playing, so faint it might have been imagined. A low vibration, like wind moving through sealed doors. Elias tightened his grip on the bow. His fingers trembled, not with fear, but with recognition. This was not noise. It had intention. He altered the melody, lowering the register, offering space rather than insistence. The response deepened. The earth seemed to hum, not in harmony, but in acknowledgement. Faith, he realized, was not belief in miracles. It was the willingness to remain present when certainty dissolved. Sweat cooled on his spine. The smell of soil grew stronger, almost sweet. He tasted iron in his mouth. Somewhere nearby, a raven took flight, wings cutting the air sharply, startled by something Elias could not see. The sound from below did not grow louder. It grew nearer. Elias did not pray. Prayer required expectation. Instead, he played as he always had, carefully, without ambition. If this was an answer, it would not be his to command. When the final note faded, the ground released a breath, slow, ancient, complete. Then silence returned, heavier than before. Elias lowered his bow. His hands were steady again. He understood now. The dead did not wish to speak. They wished to be completed. And completion, like music, required an ending. After that evening, Elias altered his ritual. He arrived earlier, before the last warmth left the stones, and remained longer, until even the insects surrendered their sound. He did not announce this change. Rituals rarely required explanation. They revealed their purpose only after endurance had proven sufficient. The ground responded. Not with voices, nor with movement that could be accused of life, but with memory. Elias began to sense distinctions beneath his feet. Some graves pressed closer to the music, drawing the sound inward. Others resisted, letting it slide away untouched. The dead, he understood, were not a single audience. They were as divided as the living had been. He began to play differently for each place. Near the old mass grave, where plague victims lay stacked without names, he played long, unbroken tones, allowing no separation between notes, as if to deny the individuality death had stolen. Near solitary stones, he let silence rest between phrases, honoring what had once been singular. His body grew thinner. Hunger arrived, but quietly, without complaint. Cold lodged in his joints. Still he returned. Isolation, he reflected, was not absence of others, but the certainty of being unnecessary. And yet here, among those who could not speak, he was needed in a way the living had never managed. One night, as mist crept low and wrapped the stones in damp cloth, Elias felt something new: alignment. The ground no longer absorbed sound blindly. It shaped it. Notes returned not as echoes, but as continuations, subtle shifts that carried intention without language. The dead were not answering. They were remembering themselves. He thought of freedom then, not as escape from suffering, but as release from interruption. The dead had achieved it fully. He, only briefly through sound. When he stopped playing, the sensation lingered. The graveyard did not collapse back into stillness at once. It waited. Elias remained seated, bow lowered, listening to the after-presence of what had passed through him. He wondered whether this was how endings truly worked, not as sudden closures, but as gradual relinquishments. Life loosening its hold. Time stepping aside. That night, as he rose to leave, his staff struck something unexpected. Not stone. Not wood. A hollow resonance answered the tap, deep and unmistakably shaped. Elias froze. He knelt, pressing his palm to the earth. It was warm, only slightly, but undeniably so. The dead, he realized, had learned where he was. And they were drawing closer. Elias was buried where he had played. No priest objected. No record was kept. The town accepted it with the same indifference it reserved for weather and loss. A blind musician had died. Such things happened. The earth received him without ceremony, as it had received so many others. The graveyard did not change. Or rather, it changed in ways too subtle to accuse. Ravens returned. Moss crept as before. Stones continued their slow descent into the soft ground. Yet those who passed nearby spoke, rarely, and only to themselves, of a feeling that pressed lightly against the chest, like a memory almost recalled. On certain evenings, when the air lay still and the light thinned toward gray, sound behaved differently there. Footsteps softened. Voices lost their sharpness. Even grief, when it arrived, seemed to find less resistance. No music was heard. That was the truest sign, for music had completed its work. Time moved on, as it always insists. Generations passed who never learned Elias's name, nor knew why the dead were buried so close to the wall. Faith shifted its language. Freedom found new prisons. Death remained unchanged. Yet beneath the ground, there was no longer impatience. What had been scattered was gathered. What had been unfinished had reached its final note, not loudly, not in triumph, but with precision. Like a hand closing a book at the exact right page. An old woman, blind from birth, once stood at the fence long years later. She paused, tilted her head, and smiled without knowing why. "It's quiet here," she said. Not empty. Quiet. And that was enough.
Like and subscribe to this channel for more interesting stories.